something completely wild, just to feel alive again? Well, tonight's story begins with a glass of bourbon, a stranger in a bar, and a marriage that was never supposed to happen, but changed everything. Autumn in Chicago always carried a chill that slipped into your bones, especially at night. The golden glow of streetlights stretched across the city, cars racing by in a chorus of horns and hurried steps. Inside a bar tucked away in River North, Amelia Carter sat alone at the counter, swirling a glass of bourbon in her hand. At 29, she was a brilliant attorney at her family's firm and the sole heir to Carter & Wells LLP, one of the most prestigious law offices in the city. The weight on her shoulders felt like a cloak made of stone. Her father, Jonathan Carter, had just issued an ultimatum: marry within 3 months or risk losing control of the firm to distant relatives, people who only cared about profit. Amelia had never feared responsibility, but she hated being manipulated. She had loved once, deeply, and had been betrayed. Since then, she trusted no one but herself. That night, with the bar lights flickering in her glass and the burn of bourbon in her throat, she noticed him, a quiet man in the corner, his gaze steady and unjudging. He sat alone in the shadowed corner of the bar, wearing a plain leather jacket, his glass of whiskey barely touched. The low light caught the angles of his face and the cool steel blue of his eyes. Quiet, sharp, like the sky just before a storm. Ethan Cole. Few in the room recognized his name, and even fewer knew he was the silent investor behind one of New York's most powerful fashion venture funds. After a recent shakeup in the company, he'd stepped back, laying low in a city where no one asked questions, hiding from headlines, from pressure, and maybe from himself. But when his eyes met Amelia's, the stillness fractured. It wasn't an accident. She didn't look away. She stared back like someone demanding answers for questions she hadn't dared to ask aloud. She stood up, walked across the floor without hesitation, her heels clicking like a countdown. "What's your deal?" she asked, her voice low, roughened by liquor and fury. Ethan lifted an eyebrow, calm. "Just sitting here." "You look like someone who thinks they're worth something. Prove it." Before he could speak, she slipped off her wool coat, revealing a silk dress that clung to her frame. Her gaze held his, sharp as glass. "Marry me," she said, "tonight. Unless you're just another coward." Ethan didn't laugh. He didn't flinch. He looked at her, really looked, as if weighing her soul more than her words. "Okay," he said, voice steady as stone. They didn't ask each other if they were sure. They didn't think about tomorrow. Amelia and Ethan left the bar hand in hand, walking through the crisp fall air like a couple who had known each other for years. But they were strangers, drunk, frustrated, and reckless. Both laughed as they stumbled upon a tiny chapel tucked between old buildings in the historic district, one of those places where spontaneous weddings weren't uncommon in Chicago. A sleepy old minister greeted them, his expression weary but not surprised. "Got your paperwork?" Ethan nodded, pulling a crumpled marriage form from his coat pocket. Amelia, still in her cocktail dress and heels, scrawled her signature with the messy handwriting of the deeply intoxicated. Wedding rings? They came from a vending machine beside the chapel, 2 cheap plastic bands that shimmered under the streetlights. Bows? Rushed? Slurred? With laughter and hiccups in between? "Do you take this man as your husband?" "Sure, why not?" Amelia slurred. "And you?" "I do," Ethan said softly, but clearly. And just like that, they were married. When Amelia woke the next morning, she was curled up on an old sofa in a modest apartment on Chicago's West Side. Sunlight filtered through crooked blinds, and the smell of coffee hung in the air. Her head throbbed, and as she blinked against the light, she saw Ethan in the kitchen, still in last night's clothes, flipping pancakes with a dented spatula. "Morning, wife," he said, like it was the most normal thing in the world. Amelia bolted upright, eyes wide with panic. She looked down at her hand. The plastic ring was still there. Rushing to her purse, she dug through everything until she found the marriage certificate with her name on it. Clear, undeniable. "Damn it," she whispered. Amelia couldn't understand why she was still in that apartment after waking up. She should have hailed a cab, filed for annulment, and erased the madness of the night before. But instead, she was eating pancakes with a man she barely knew. A man who, somehow, had become her husband just hours ago. Ethan acted like it was completely normal. He set the table, poured coffee, asked if she wanted extra syrup, no pressure, no over-the-top charm, just calm. And somehow, that unnerved her more than anything. The apartment was small and old but neat. On the bookshelf were titles about investing, management, and business strategy. Not exactly what you'd expect from someone who claimed to do odd jobs. In the kitchen, every utensil was clean, organized, almost like a professional setup. "What did you say you do again?" she asked, suspicion lacing her tone. Ethan shrugged. "A bit of this and that, short-term gigs, nothing permanent." "And that pays enough to live in Chicago?" He just smiled. Amelia frowned slightly. None of it added up, from the way he spoke to how he sidestepped her questions. But he wasn't a con artist, not in any familiar sense. He didn't ask for money, didn't demand anything. He cooked for her, gave her a place to crash. Her father, Jonathan Carter, didn't react the way she expected when she told him she got married. "Does he have money?" he asked bluntly. "No, I don't think so." "Good. At least he's not another one of those Wall Street leeches sniffing around you because of the firm. Bring him by. I want to meet him." Amelia froze. She didn't know what was worse, marrying a stranger or the fact that her father actually liked him. She didn't know what she was thinking when she agreed to bring him to meet her father. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe she was too tired to argue. Or worse, maybe a small part of her trusted him. Ethan walked into her father's apartment in a crisp white shirt and clean jeans. Not flashy, but presentable. Jonathan Carter looked him over, then gave a short nod. "What do you do for a living?" he asked. "A bit of everything," Ethan replied calmly. "Here and there, keep things running." Jonathan didn't press further. "Honest." "Good." She needs someone to keep her grounded. Amelia just stood there, stunned. She didn't know what was stranger. How convincingly Ethan played the regular guy, or how much her father actually liked him. After that day, she thought Ethan would step back, but he didn't. 3 days later, he brought hot soup to her office when she was working late. "Figured you hadn't eaten," he said, his voice calm, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. A week later, he fixed her leaking kitchen faucet without anyone asking. Then came the necklace. A delicate silver chain, simple, elegant, appeared on her desk with a handwritten note. "For my wife, someone who deserves things more beautiful than any contract." Amelia stared at the gift. It was clearly real. She knew the brand, the price. It wasn't cheap, not under a few $1,000s. How could a man living off odd jobs afford something like that? The suspicion returned. But she couldn't deny one thing. Ethan had never asked for anything. He quietly helped, showed up when she needed someone, and always stepped back when she asked. Worse than suspicion was the truth. She had started to expect him. She waited for the knock on her door, the smell of food in a paper bag, that steady, non-judgmental gaze. One evening, after Ethan left, she stood in her empty living room and realized something terrifying. His presence made her feel safe. And safety wasn't something she was used to. Not after betrayal, not in a world where everything came with conditions. Ethan was still a mystery, but he was the only thing keeping her from falling apart. Amelia had her suspicions, the inconsistencies in Ethan's story, the pauses between his answers, the way he stayed unnervingly calm in situations that would have rattled anyone else, but she hadn't expected the truth to be this big. That night, at the Chicago Legal Association's annual gala, Amelia arrived alone. Dressed professionally, heels clicking across the marble floor, she kept her posture sharp, even if her mind was a storm. Everything felt normal until the lights dimmed and the announcer took the stage. Please welcome one of the most influential private investors in the country, founder and CEO of Cole & Partners, Ethan Cole. Time stopped. Amelia froze as she saw him walk onto the stage. not in a casual shirt but a tailored black suit, polished and powerful under the spotlight. He didn't look like the man who made her soup. He looked like a stranger. Ethan scanned the room, then locked eyes with her. "There've been a lot of rumors about me lately," he began, his voice calm and deep, "about my firm and about the woman I recently married. Let me be clear. Amelia Carter is my wife, and I will protect her at any cost." The room went silent, then erupted. Cameras flashed, heads turned, every gaze now fixed on her. Amelia felt her chest cave in. It wasn't just the lie. It was the fact that he hadn't chosen to tell her the truth. She left the event before anyone could stop her. Her heart was a blur of emotion, anger, confusion, and pain. Because if he had been a CEO all along, then what else had been real? Amelia didn't return Ethan's calls after the gala. She needed space, or at least an excuse not to hear his voice. She wasn't sure if she was angry, hurt, or both. All she knew was things had just started to feel real, and then the truth had shattered it. But peace had never lasted long in her life. The next morning at work, her assistant sent a message. "Daniel Harris is in the lobby. He says it's personal." Amelia froze. Daniel Girard, the ex who once used her to climb the ladder, weaving lies and rumors to advance his career. She'd cut him off 2 years ago when she discovered the truth. His return could never mean anything good. They met in a private conference room. Daniel looked the same. Charming smile, calculating eyes. "Congrats on the surprise wedding," he said with a smirk. "What do you want?" she snapped. "Just a small exchange. I have photos and information damaging to you and Ethan. But if you get me Cole & Partners' proposal for the Northern project, it all disappears." Amelia clenched her fists. "That's blackmail." Daniel grinned. "I call it business." She left the meeting seething. That night, she went to Ethan's apartment, not to apologize. She needed answers, and he already knew. "Daniel's back," Ethan said, opening the door. "I know who he is. And if I don't hand over the documents, he'll destroy everything," she replied. "Then let him try," Ethan said calmly. "I'm not afraid of him. I'm only afraid that you won't trust me anymore." Amelia couldn't sleep after leaving Ethan's apartment. His words echoed in her mind over and over. "I'm not afraid of Daniel. I'm only afraid you won't trust me anymore." She wished things were really that simple. The next evening, she had a late meeting in the lower level of the main office building. As she stepped into the dim parking garage, she realized just how alone she was. Footsteps echoed behind her, then a voice, cold, taunting. "Daniel says hello." Before she could react, 3 men lunged forward. One grabbed her arm, another yanked her purse, the third pulled a knife. Her hands shook as she dialed Ethan, whispering the only thing she could. "Basement?" Then he came. Ethan burst onto the scene like he'd been running through fire. He didn't hesitate. He fought back, shielding her with his body, striking fast, hard. Blows landed, metal scraped skin, grunts filled the air. And then silence. The attackers fled. Ethan collapsed by the car, blood running from a gash on his forehead. "Ethan!" she screamed, falling to her knees beside him. He opened his eyes, gave her a weak, crooked smile. "I'm here. It's okay. Don't cry." At the hospital, as he was rushed into the emergency room, Amelia sat alone, arms wrapped around her stomach. Instinctively, a strange sensation crept down her spine. The next day, she went to the clinic. The doctor gave her a gentle smile. "Congratulations, you're pregnant, about 8 weeks along." Amelia froze. 8 weeks, right after the wedding night. No doubt. The baby was Ethan's. Ethan was discharged from the hospital a week later. The wound on his head would take time to heal, but his eyes had never looked brighter. During his stay, Amelia was always there, holding his hand through rainy nights, reading aloud when sleep evaded him, and sitting in silence when neither of them knew what to say. And somehow, in that silence, trust quietly bloomed. When he came home, he didn't return to his old apartment. He came to hers. Not out of obligation, not because of a contract, but because they both had made the choice. Because this time, it was love. News that Ethan had pulled out of the Hudson Yards project spread quickly through the investment world, but he didn't care. Instead, he redirected the entire fund, millions of dollars, into establishing a foundation named after Amelia, supporting women and children in crisis, survivors of trauma, people who, like her, had once been left behind. When she heard him say it during the press conference, Amelia couldn't stop the tears. "You did all this for me?" Ethan smiled. "No, for people like you, but you were the reason I started." One quiet night, after a simple dinner of soup and toast, Amelia gently placed his hand on her belly. "I'm pregnant. It's ours." Ethan looked at her, and for the first time, tears filled his eyes. Not from pain, but from the sudden, overwhelming feeling that maybe, just maybe, he was finally home. Life didn't become perfect. They argued about cleaning schedules, baby names, and whether fish sauce belonged in the fridge. But every morning, Ethan made her tea. Every night, Amelia read to him, even if just a page. They walked through the park, talked about preschools, and picked colors for the nursery. One day, Ethan asked, "What if I hadn't said yes that night? What would have happened?" She smiled. "Maybe I'd have married some sweaty tax lawyer who speaks in clauses." "You sure?" "Yeah, and I would have regretted it for the rest of my life." On a crisp winter evening, they stood on the balcony, fingers interlaced, gazing down at the city glowing below. Each lit window a whisper of stories unfolding. Amelia leaned her head on his shoulder. "You know, I once thought I'd never love anyone for real again. And now I love you, I love this baby, I love that nothing about us was planned and that somehow it still became everything I needed." Ethan squeezed her hand, his smile soft and steady. "Me too, even if you throw fish sauce at me at 3 a.m., I'll still choose you." Their laughter floated into the cold air. Behind them, the city pulsed, relentless and loud. But here, in this moment, in each other's arms, there was only peace. And the beginning of something truly real.